In late 1961, the KGB executed one of the most dangerous disinformation operations in history. Codename Phantom Strike. Objective: convince Washington that Moscow was weak. Simultaneously convince Moscow that Washington was preparing for war. Weapon: a double agent embedded inside CIA's Soviet Analysis Division. Result: Nikita Khrushchev, believing Kennedy was preparing a surprise nuclear strike, secretly deployed R-12 missiles to Cuba. By the time American U-2 spy planes spotted the launch sites, the world had already crossed the point of no return. This is the story of how a single false intelligence report nearly started World War III. October 1961. The Cold War was experiencing its most tense period in human history. The United States and the Soviet Union possessed nuclear arsenals capable of completely annihilating each other. Every diplomatic crisis between the two superpowers was a potential apocalypse scenario. But during this period, wars weren't won solely through military strength. The real battlefield lay in the shadowy corridors of intelligence services. The secret war between the KGB and CIA was fought on three fronts. First front, human intelligence. Both sides attempted to infiltrate agents into enemy territory. Diplomats, scientists, soldiers. Everyone was a potential intelligence source. Second front, signals, intelligence. Encrypted telegrams, radio communications, phone taps. Every message could potentially reveal a secret. Third front, deception. And this was the most dangerous, because on this front, false information was as much a weapon as true information. The operation the KGB prepared in late 1961 was the most sophisticated example of the deception front. Moscow faced a strategic dilemma. On one hand, it wanted to project an image to the Western world that Soviet military power is weak, not a threat. This way, it could loosen NATO's military budget and reduce the number of American bases in Europe. On the other hand, the Kremlin had another concern within its own inner circle, whether the Pentagon was planning a preemptive nuclear strike. In the late 1950s, some generals in the US Air Force had advocated the idea that we must strike before the Soviets achieved missile launch capability. These reports had reached Moscow through KGB sources inside Langley. Khrushchev and the Soviet General Staff were caught in a paradox: appear weak, but don't become defenseless. The solution was an incredibly risky disinformation plan. In November 1961, on the 7th floor of the Lubyanka building in Moscow, the KGB's first deputy chairman gathered a small room full of senior operations officers. A file lay on the table. It bore a single word: phantom. The operations architect was under the direct supervision of Yuri Andropov, the KGB's legendary disinformation expert. Andropov had demonstrated during the 1950s Hungarian uprising how a popular movement could be collapsed from within using false information. Now he would apply the same tactics at a strategic level against the CIA. The first phase of the plan was simple: use a source already working inside the CIA. The source was known by the codename Abel. His real name was kept in restricted access files even within KGB archives. But his role was clear: a mid-level intelligence analyst working inside CIA's Soviet Analysis Unit. For years, he'd been transmitting low-profile but critical information to Moscow. Abel's value came not from the information he accessed, but from his credibility. No one inside the CIA suspected him. His reports could reach directly to the National Security Council's desk. The objective of Operation Phantom Strike was to use Abel to simultaneously transmit two separate pieces of false information to two different targets. Target 1: message to Washington: Soviet missile program is 3 to 5 years behind expectations. Moscow's long-range nuclear capacity is limited. Target 2: message to Moscow: Pentagon is preparing preemptive nuclear strike plans against the Soviets for spring 1962. Codename Operation Chrome Dome Expansion. The two messages complemented each other. If Washington believed the Soviets were weak, it would ease military pressure. If Moscow believed Washington was preparing an attack, it would have justification for making a preemptive move. And the KGB had found the perfect tool to turn these two lies into truth. a fake intelligence document, designing the document. In the first week of December 1961, at a secret KGB facility outside Moscow, a small team worked on a document. The document appeared to be an internal Pentagon memorandum, title, Strategic Assessment, Soviet Second Strike Capability, Gap Analysis. The document was deliberately filled with technical jargon, GPS coordinates of Soviet missile launch pads, estimated missile counts, vulnerabilities in command and control infrastructure. But the most critical part was the document's final paragraph. Given the 18 to 24-month window before Soviet ICBM operationalization, Joint Chiefs recommend evaluating preemptive strike scenarios under NSC 68 framework. Window closes spring 1963. This sentence was ambiguous enough to cause panic in the Kremlin. Did it mean evaluate preemptive strike scenarios or approve preemptive strike? The KGB had deliberately left the document vague, because in intelligence analysis, the most dangerous information is unclear information. An ambiguous document confirms the reader's worst fears, leaking the document. The question was how to deliver the document to Langley. Giving it directly to Abel would be risky. If the CIA questioned the document's source, Abel could be exposed. Instead, the KGB used a much more sophisticated method, double infiltration. In January 1962, in West Berlin, a CIA contact officer met with a source at a cafe near the Berlin Wall. The source claimed to be an officer working inside East German military intelligence, Stasi. Named Klaus Richter, false identity. Richter had been selling valuable information to the CIA. Most of it was real. This increased his credibility. The CIA had registered Richter in its source files as B-level reliability. At the January 1962 meeting, Richter handed the CIA officer an envelope. Inside was a photocopy of the Pentagon memorandum. "I got this from a source in Moscow," Richter said. "The Soviets have obtained an American leak, but they don't know I allowed it to fall into their hands. Can you verify its authenticity?" The CIA officer sent the document to Langley. CIA's response. When analysts at Langley examined the document, there were many things they should have been suspicious about. 1. Source reliability was medium level, B level. 2. The document came as something that had passed through enemy hands. 3. The content was highly sensitive. This type of memo would normally be burn after reading category. But here, a critical confirmation bias came into play. The CIA had already received numerous reports throughout 1961, suggesting the Soviet missile program was behind schedule. Satellite imagery showed that the number of Soviet ICBM launch pads was less than expected. The Pentagon also supported the view that Soviet nuclear capacity is being exaggerated. Therefore, the Phantom Strike document confirmed a hypothesis that analysts already believed. In psychology, this is called confirming evidence bias. The human brain easily accepts information that supports existing beliefs and views contradictory information with suspicion. CIA's Soviet analysis unit classified the document as probably genuine, and a copy was sent to the White House. Moscow's maneuver. At the same time, the KGB was playing another game. The same document, the Pentagon memorandum, was coincidentally obtained near the American embassy in Moscow. A KGB agent planted the document in a diplomat's briefcase, then was stopped by Soviet security forces under the pretext of suspicious activity. The briefcase was searched, the document was found. The Kremlin presented this document as proof of American attack plans. In February 1962, two reports sat on Khrushchev's desk. 1. GRU, Soviet Military Intelligence Report. Pentagon is evaluating preemptive strike scenarios. 2. KGB report. Same document confirmed by CIA sources in West Berlin. Information from two independent sources was enough for Khrushchev. April 1962. The Kremlin held a secret meeting. At the table, Nikita Khrushchev, Defense Minister Rodion Malinovsky, and KGB Chief Vladimir Semychostny. Khrushchev asked his military advisors, "If the Americans really are going to attack, how much time do we have?" GRU's answer was clear, 18 to 24 months, maybe less. So what are our options? The Soviet General Staff presented three options. Option 1, diplomatic pressure, expose American aggression at the UN, but it was risky. If the Americans denied the plan, the Soviets would look paranoid. Option 2, rapidly increase nuclear forces. But the Soviet economy was already struggling. More missiles meant less bread. Option 3, a strategic move. Deploy medium-range missiles to a point close to American territory. This would establish mutual assured destruction balance. Khrushchev chose option 3. Target, Cuba. Fidel Castro had formed an alliance with the Soviets after winning the revolution in 1959. Cuba was only 90 miles from Florida. R-12 medium-range ballistic missiles deployed there could hit Washington in 13 minutes. Khrushchev's logic was this: if the Americans were planning an attack, the missiles in Cuba would deter them. If they weren't planning one, the missiles were a bargaining chip to remove American Jupiter missiles from Turkey. In May 1962, Soviet ships secretly set sail for Cuba. Inside 42 R-12 missiles, nuclear warheads, and launchpad equipment. Operation Annihilation had begun. But this operation was the product of an intelligence failure. Because the Pentagon wasn't actually planning a preemptive strike, the fake document created by the KGB had mobilized the Kremlin against a non-existent threat. Discovery, October 14, 1962. As an American U-2 spy plane passed over Cuba, it noticed a strange structure in the San Cristobal region. When the photographs reached Langley, CIA photo analysis experts immediately saw it. Soviet R-12 medium-range ballistic missile launch pad. On the morning of October 16, President John F. Kennedy was awakened by National Security Advisor McGeorge Bundy. Mr. President, the Soviets have placed nuclear missiles in Cuba. Kennedy's first question was, how did this happen? Where was our intelligence? The CIA's answer was surprising. We may have underestimated Soviet missile capacity, sir. The truth was that Operation Phantom Strike had worked. The CIA had been receiving Soviets a week reports for months. They had assessed the possibility of missile deployment to Cuba as low probability. Now the White House faced two options. Option 1, military intervention, bomb Cuba, destroy the missile pads. But the risk, if a Soviet soldier was killed, Moscow might retaliate, and the Soviets could invade West Berlin. This would activate NATO, and World War III would begin. Option 2, diplomatic bluff, establish a naval blockade, prevent Soviet ships from approaching Cuba. But the risk, if Soviet ships tried to break the blockade, they would have to open fire. That also meant war. Kennedy chose option 2, but he called it a quarantine. Blockade would be considered an act of war. 13 days. On October 26, 1962, Kennedy addressed the nation on television. An offensive military buildup has been detected in Cuba. This is a clear threat to America. The next day, the U.S. Navy surrounded Cuba. Soviet ships continued advancing toward the island. On the morning of October 24, a Soviet cargo ship came within 10 miles of a U.S. destroyer. The American ship sent a signal, "Stop, or we will fire." The world held its breath. That morning, Khrushchev realized a truth in the Kremlin. This was a misunderstanding. The Americans weren't planning a preemptive strike, but now, as a result of a false intelligence report, two superpowers stood at the brink of nuclear war. On October 26, Khrushchev sent Kennedy a secret letter. "We will withdraw the missiles, but you must also remove the Jupiter missiles from Turkey and promise not to invade Cuba." Kennedy accepted. On October 28, 1962, the crisis ended. Soviet ships turned back. The missiles were dismantled. The world had been 13 days away from nuclear war. After the Cuban Missile Crisis, both sides acknowledged a truth: intelligence failure could destroy humanity. The CIA launched an internal investigation after the crisis. The question was, how did we so badly misjudge Soviet missile capacity? The investigation found traces of Operation Phantom Strike. The Pentagon memorandum from West Berlin was re-examined. The document had signs of forgery, but they were discovered too late. Abel was never exposed. The KGB managed to protect him. However, the second phase of Phantom Strike, deceiving Moscow, had produced an unexpected result. The Soviets had believed their own lies. After the crisis, Khrushchev faced internal pressure. The Soviet General Staff criticized him for endangering the country by exaggerating the American threat. He was removed from office in 1964. The Pentagon, after the Cuba crisis, said never again. The risk of nuclear war was too high to rely on false intelligence. Military consequences: Soviets withdrew missiles from Cuba but didn't lose strategically. American missiles in Turkey were also removed. In the USA, the quarantine strategy worked, but CIA intelligence credibility was questioned. Political consequences: direct communication line, hotline. In 1963, the Red Phone was established between Moscow and Washington. This allowed leaders to speak directly during crises. Nuclear disarmament negotiations began. The 1963 Partial Test Ban Treaty was signed. Intelligence reforms: CIA. Single-source intelligence was no longer acceptable. Every critical report had to be verified by at least 2 independent sources. KGB. The blowback risk from phantom strike was taken into account in future disinformation operations. Operation Phantom Strike is the most dangerous example of disinformation in modern intelligence history. Because it succeeded, but it succeeded too well. The KGB managed to deceive both Washington and Moscow, but the result was a crisis no one expected. Today, this operation is the source of 3 critical lessons. 1. Disinformation can backfire. Spreading false information can spiral out of control. The KGB convinced Moscow that the Americans will attack, but the Kremlin believed this lie and deployed missiles. Result: the KGB's own game put the Soviets at risk. Modern reflection: Russia's disinformation campaign in the 2016 US elections led to the election of an unexpected leader. But in the long term, Western trust in Russia completely collapsed. Blowback. 2. Lack of intelligence. Truth standards brings disaster. The CIA didn't adequately question the document from Berlin because the documents supported a hypothesis they already believed. After this mistake, the CIA issued Intelligence Community Directive 23. Rules: multiple source verification. Critical information isn't accepted from a single source. Red team analysis. Every hypothesis is tested by a devil's advocate team. Source reliability score: A, most reliable; F, suspicious. Scale is mandatory. Modern reflection. Before the 2003 Iraq War, the CIA again relied on single-source WMD reports. Result: 500,000 civilians died. America's global reputation collapsed. The Phantom Strike lesson had been forgotten. The nuclear age: intelligence failure, existential threat. In 1962, the world came to the brink of nuclear war as a result of a false report. Today, artificial intelligence, deepfakes, and cyber warfare tools have made the spread of false intelligence easier. If a deepfake video shows a leader declaring war, how will the opposing side respond? Phantom Strike was the 1960s version of this question. The answer: disaster. Modern measure. NATO and Russia established the Nuclear Risk Reduction Center in 2020. Goal: prevent false intelligence from turning into nuclear crisis. In October 1962, the world stood at the brink of nuclear war for 13 days. The reason? Not the military aggression of 2 superpowers, an intelligence operation, a fake document, and a lie that no one verified. Phantom Strike was history's most successful and most dangerous disinformation operation. It was successful because it deceived both the CIA and the KGB. It was dangerous because it nearly destroyed humanity. Today, before every major crisis, we must ask the question: who is the source of this information, and who else is verifying it? Because history has taught us this: false intelligence is as lethal as accurate missiles. This story shows the invisible war of intelligence. If you're amazed by how a report, a decision, a lie changed the world, subscribe. Because history's greatest wars were won not on the battlefields you see, but in the intelligence rooms you don't. Tell us in the comments. What false intelligence scenario worries you most today?